My name's Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. I'm the Executive Director of Churches for Middle East Peace. And I'm grateful to welcome you here today for Stories from the Ground, reflections from some of the travelers on the recent Holy Land Coordination Committee trip. I'll talk in a minute about just what that is. Some housekeeping things. Is the view of this for the speaker just before we get started?
I'll spotlight the speaker, as they go.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you so much for that. Well, I'd love to pray and acknowledge God's presence with us. I know many of those with us will be Catholic. My family background is Irish Catholic. My great aunt was a Catholic nun, and I used to spend significant time with her in the convent in the summers. And so great appreciation for the Catholic faith tradition. Of course, we have many with us, I'm sure, who will also be from the Church of England and from many of our Churches for Middle East Peace denominations. So welcome, whatever your Christian tradition or other faith tradition. Pray as you feel comfortable, acknowledging the Lord's presence with us. I this week have been using as a breath prayer Philippians chapter 4, verse 7, that the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, might guard our hearts and our minds in Christ Jesus. And so that has been my prayer. And so, Lord God, I pray that you would guard our hearts and minds as we turn to the Middle East, to the Holy Land, to Israel, to the occupied Palestinian territories, including East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, I pray that your presence would be with us wherever we may be in the world, across the Atlantic, in Washington, D.C., somewhere in the United States. God, be present with us. Prince of Peace, I pray that you would give us wisdom, that you would guard our hearts. Bless this time. I pray, Lord, that we would be agents of peace, that you would help us also be advocates of your righteousness and your justice for the sake of all of the people of the Holy Land, be they Jewish, Christian, or Muslim, whatever their faith tradition. I pray this in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So again, I'm Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon, Executive Director of Churches for Middle East Peace. I have the great privilege of facilitating this conversation, Stories from the Ground, reflections from the Holy Land Coordination trip. I wanted to just take a quick minute and tell you a little bit about the Holy Land Coordination Committee. In a minute, after I finish speaking, I'll send a link for the Holy Land Coordination. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about the history of it. It was formed in the 1990s at the invitation of the Holy See. And my understanding is that Father Drew Christensen was one of the people who either formed it or founded it, or was one of the people who formed it. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about Father Drew. He was born in 1945. He passed in 2022. He was a distinguished professor of ethics and human development at Georgetown University, a consultant to the Holy See and the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, and a consultant to the Vatican Secretary of State. I will put a link that is in memoriam of him, but he also was an ardent advocate of Churches for Middle East Peace. We founded a Catholic advisory council at his encouragement. He mentored me. And as a result, Churches for Middle East Peace is an advisory member of the Holy Land Coordination Committee. And so Churches for Middle East Peace is ecumenical. It includes 36 member communions, of which the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is an observer member. And so I wanted to just express gratitude to Father Drew Christensen. And for many, many years, since the Coordination Committee started, Catholic bishops and partners from around the world almost every year have gone to the Holy Land or to different parts of the Middle East as observers to meet with Catholic partners and other leaders. And so we have 2 or 3 of the travelers who were on this year's trip. And so Churches for Middle East Peace's Kyle Christophalo traveled, Christopher Lundquist, who is from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops traveled. He also is a board member of Churches for Middle East Peace, and the Right Reverend Bishop Christopher Chesson, also from the Church of England, traveled. And I'll give you a bit of each of their biographic information as well prior to their speaking. So before I give Bishop Chesson a few minutes, because I'll have him start with a few minutes of reflection from his travels, I wanted to just tell you a little bit about who he is. So the esteemed Bishop Southwark, I don't know how to pronounce all of these British terms. The Right Reverend Christopher Chesson was introduced to the House of Lords as one of the 26 Lords Spiritual, where he speaks on a wide range of issues such as immigration, overseas development, foreign affairs. He maintains keen interest in the Holy Land and is a trustee of the Balfour Project, who we just got introduced to and have been speaking with in past months. And Embrace the Middle East, which is also a partner to CMEP, as well as Friends of the Holy Land. And I could tell you a lot more about him, but I don't want to take his time. And I just want to say that Bishop Chesson, we have been so honored that you have been so outspoken and such an advocate for Christians in the Holy Land, for Palestinian Christians. And I want to say thank you. And I'll get choked up because it's been a hard 507 days. So much gratitude to you, and would love to hear a few minutes of what this trip was like for you as you traveled this past January.
Thank you very much, Dr. May Elise, and I'm very honored to be participating in this session for Churches for Middle East Peace. And I share your commitment and passion for that outcome according to the Lord's will. As an Anglican bishop, a member of the Church of England in the Diocese of Southwark, and there is a Catholic Archdiocese of Southwark where Archbishop John Wilson serves, we have been praying as Anglicans for the Holy Father in recent days, and I have asked the diocesan family, the Anglican diocesan family, to pray for our Catholic brothers and sisters in Southwark as the world prays together for Pope Francis. And I've been very privileged to be the one and only Anglican Episcopal participant in the Holy Land Coordination Group in its existence. That is an enormous privilege each year. And the first year I participated in 2015 was after there had been about 60 days of aerial bombardment of Gaza in the previous year. And the biggest issue was the trauma, particularly for children and young people. And of course, that issue is magnified and amplified many times over because of the recent past since the 7th of October 2023. It was this year that we went out, and 2 days ahead, I was staying at the Anglican Cathedral. And on my first day, I was invited to join Rabbis for Human Rights in the West Bank, who regularly go and meet Palestinian settlement farmers and take part in shared activities. This day, when I was with them, we were planting olive trees, and it was a possibility to talk to 40 Jewish rabbis about their hopes for peace and reconciliation. And it seems to me that the conflict and the tragedy of the past 15 months or so has eclipsed to a large degree the large number of people that are working and praying for peace. And this was a recurring dynamic through the Holy Land Coordination, all our encounters. And of course, one of the principles of the coordination is to focus on the small Christian community in the Holy Land and to obtain a deeper understanding of the intensified pressure that Christians, especially young people in the West Bank, are facing. And the consequence of this is increased emigration, the fear that is shared by the heads of the churches and senior clergy, that the region will be reduced significantly again and again in the indigenous Christian presence. This is very serious indeed, because there is a commitment by people of goodwill to see the different faiths as each having an intrinsic part to play in the present and the future. I think also that there is a clear fear that with the conflict focused on Gaza, the increasing pressure in the West Bank is also to some degree eclipsed by the focus of the war and the now negotiated ceasefire. We were there for the first day of the implementation of the ceasefire on the Sunday. And that day I was traveling to Anglican churches in Nablus. And it was impossible because of roadblocks and other restrictions for us to reach our destinations. We got as far as Mount Gerizim, the holy mountain for the Samaritans, but we couldn't get any further. We couldn't actually reach the churches. This was very symbolic because the coordination, when it was in Ramallah on its final day, also I think we realized that whereas perhaps the visitations and the coordination meetings 10 years ago, there was a sense in the West Bank of the settlements, and of course the settlements, the Israeli settlements, are in international law illegal settlements, and the settlers are illegal settlers, although they have custody of the land and of their settlements, that they were in enclaves. And one of the points we made in the final communique this year is that that position now seems to have changed. And it seems in the West Bank as if it is now the Palestinians who are restricted effectively into enclaves with restrictions on movement. And it is the settlers who have freedom and protection from the IDF and others. And of course, some of them behaving in criminal ways. So that was one of the insights of this year's visitation and community. I think as far as the political situation is concerned, that the understandable Israeli preoccupation with security at all costs removes from the equation what will make for peace, which is reconciliation between people of goodwill and the forging of alliances between people of goodwill that breaks down some of the barriers. And to this end, I would hope that the British government might be willing at some stage, sooner rather than later, to follow the good example of the Holy See and recognize Palestine as a state in its own right. The bishops were there to pray together. We were supported by our staff officers, and each of our encounters was incredibly blessed. And I don't know, Dr. May Elise, how much you want me to go through meeting by meeting, but those are perhaps my general
I think that's a great
overview at the
initial.
moment. That might be a good place to start. and
I
then
think,
people in due course could ask me questions.
thank you. And I'll probably have a couple follow-up questions too once we do some initial remarks. So I think that, thank you. And to your point about some of the things you shared in terms of travel restrictions, statistics are saying, and this was after your travels, of course, but the number of deaths of West Bank Palestinians since January are in the dozens. You know, what's happening in the West Bank right now is being called the silent war. You know, most of the world is paying attention to what's happening in Gaza. And so what's happening in the West Bank, the number of Palestinians that have been displaced there is the highest number of Palestinians since 1967. You know, those are some of the realities of just some of the facts on the ground that many people in the United States don't know about. And so I want to shift now, if I may, to Christopher Lundquist. And I think it's important, you know, I mentioned what the Holy Land Coordination Committee is. This is not an official event of the Holy Land Coordination Committee. These are travelers giving reflections, you know, travelers from that event. And so this is a CMEP event and, you know, participants from that trip. But we don't, of course, speak on behalf of the committee. We don't speak on behalf of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops by any means. We're grateful, of course, that you're with us, Christopher. And thank you, of course, for representing the conference on our board. I know also that the conference and Catholic Relief Services have been very affected as of late by many of the decisions of the Trump administration, including the cutting of aid. So Catholic Relief Services is one of the most significant receivers of aid from USAID, for example, and they do such significant and incredible work you know, in the region throughout the Middle East, but on the ground in Gaza and, you know, in Jerusalem and the West Bank. But let me introduce you to Christopher. And so Christopher Lundquist has been with the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. As I mentioned, represents them on our board as observers. The bio I have for you is more focused on Latin America than the Middle East, which was my understanding your prior role at the U.S. conference. But Christopher Lundquist graduated from American University and the London School of Economics, focusing on civil military relations in Latin America and democratization dynamics, working for political risk consulting firms in the U.S. and Spain, with ongoing professional specializations, including international trade dynamics, transnational organized crime in Latin America, and religious freedom. As a Knight of the Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulchre, Christopher's also focused on advancing international dialogue in Israel and Palestine, and we're so grateful. So Christopher, would love to hear from you, your observations from your recent travels on this journey.
Thank you so much, May. I guess you know, part of me would want to focus on really the very positive dimension of us being able to be there with the Christian community, and of course it's bittersweet because, as you mentioned, you know, there's been a bleeding out of people from the West Bank, and a lot of these, as you know, are Christians. We are in a real danger of having the Holy Land become a museum, a Christian museum devoid of the living stones. Here at the conference and in other institutions, we like to refer to the Christians of the Holy Land as the stones of the land sanctified by the birth, ministry, death, and resurrection of Christ. And we are in severe peril of seeing the Holy Land become absolutely devoid of its Christian population. And so, in a sense, I would say that I don't know to what extent that has you know, been received by the majority of the people here in the United States and in other Christian countries. There is that emergency in the Holy Land and the real danger of it becoming completely devoid of its Christian population. So in that sense, it was a very bittersweet trip. You know, we were there with the Christians. We prayed with them. We essentially were present with them and heard from them directly. Another dimension, of course, that was particularly poignant, and of course, you know, at the Holy See, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Secretary of State, has said that the Holy See opposes the deportation of Gazans from Gaza in any international plan to pacify the area. That is that was another dimension that was very poignantly present with us throughout the entire trip, and of course the humanitarian situation in Gaza and the West Bank, but in particular Gaza, and was another critical component of our presence there. As you know, CRS is very much present in the West Bank and in Gaza, and CRS, Catholic Relief Services, will continue to be present and to advocate for more robust humanitarian assistance in Gaza. So in that sense, you know, the Catholic humanitarian agencies' presence will continue, and despite any political difficulties, and we will continue to bridge build with those who might disagree with us, with those who with different points of view, and because that's what the Bishops' Conference does. You know, the bishops are principally in the area of foreign policy bridge builders. They look for consensus for the good of the most vulnerable, and we apply Catholic social teaching to these very complex scenarios. So in that sense, it was, you know, as I said at the beginning of my intervention, a very bittersweet trip, but I'm just you know, very grateful that we were able to be there.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you. And I will have follow-up questions for you about some of the things you've heard from some of the Christian leaders you met with. And I'm just grateful and looking forward to more time with you as your tenure on the board continues. Kyle Christophilo is our head of DC office, Senior Director of Advocacy and Government Affairs for Churches for Middle East Peace. And we have many spaces at CMEP where we talk about the geopolitics of the region and our advocacy specifically, which focuses on holistic peace building and economic and humanitarian assistance, which is a major focus of our work, and then human rights. This conversation specifically, as it relates to the Holy Land Coordination trip and travels, is focusing a lot on the Christian community and the priorities of the Holy Land Coordination trip. And in that regard, Kyle, you know, some of the things that happened in Jerusalem this week with the Armenian Patriarchate in Jerusalem, I think, are directly relevant to some of the things we heard Christopher just talk about. The church, the sustainability of the church in the region. And so I wonder if in your remarks, you could share what happened at the Armenian Patriarchate and CMEP's response as well, because I think it's, you know, it's been a few weeks since you've been to Jerusalem, talking about the Christian community there. What's happening in the Old City is so relevant in this moment. I very much want people to be sure to hear that. In light of Christopher talking about the living stones of the land, what they're going through in this moment, I think is so important too.
Thank you, May, and I apologize. I'm in CMEP's office on Capitol Hill, where we can see the Capitol, but sometimes our internet does not cooperate. So I hope it cooperates. I think I got everything that you asked, but you broke up, I know, on my end, not yours. So really grateful to be with you all today. I do think I'll get, yes, to some of the developments that you mentioned toward the end of my initial remarks, May, in some sense, it feels like we were there a year ago because of what has transpired, even just in the, 4 to 5 weeks since we've been there. We were there during, for example, the inauguration of President Trump. And so it was before a lot of the pronouncements from this current administration and some of the shifts in U.S. policy. So we were there. So like I said, a lot has transpired even since we've returned from our trip. I would say, as has been mentioned, the emphasis of the Holy Land Coordination is really to be able to witness and be in relationship with the Christian community on the ground in Israel-Palestine. And it was a recurring theme in many of the places that we went to, from the west, from Bethlehem to Ramallah to Taipei, the real fear that from the leaders of how many Christians from the West Bank have left over the past 16 months. Of course, as Reverend Dr. May told us at the start, and others have mentioned, a lot of the focus these past 500 plus days have been on Gaza, rightfully so. But while that is happening, we have seen a big issue also within the West Bank, right, and how that is affecting the Christian population there. And so in some cases, I believe it was in Taipei, where there's the concern that 20% of the Christian population of that village might be gone by the time this year ends. And what will that mean for the ongoing sustainability of the church? And to Christopher's point of the idea that the Holy Land could just be devoid of the Christian population. So that was a persistent theme that came up, when we were talking both with priests as well as lay leaders. And I saw this through, through my encounters as well. And so it really is something that was prevalent for me. I was really excited that we also got to spend some time with Dawood Nassar at the Tent of Nations. Many of you who are watching this probably have yourself, if you've traveled to Israel, Palestine, visited Dawood Nassar and the Tent of Nations. It's another example of a Christian family in the West Bank and the challenges that they are facing. And it was my first time back in the Holy Land since October 7th. And just seeing even the route to get to the Tent of Nations had changed. Many of you who have been there before remember, there's a certain point at which you have to get out of your car and walk the rest of the way. Even that is no longer accessible. So you have to kind of go the back route and go to the back of the Tent of Nations instead of through the way that has been the primary entrance now for many years. So that was really a recurring theme. Every place we saw, that we were meeting with people that have committed to stay, but it was hard for them to explain even to their children or to other members of their Christian community why it was important to remain in the land, given all of the challenges and the fact that it does tend to be easier for Christian families to migrate. Many Christians already have family members who are citizens of other places, and so it can be easier for them to leave. Last thing I will say, as was mentioned, so in our conversations, especially with those in Jerusalem, one of the recurring themes that came up were the structural challenges that are facing Christians in the Holy Land. And one of this being the issues of taxation. And so you might have seen just within the past few days that the Armenian quarter thriving. There has been a thriving Armenian presence, Christian presence in the Holy Land for many centuries, and they have contributed to the fabric of that city, to a city that we at CMEP believe should be multi-faith, right? So that there is a thriving Jewish, Christian, and Muslim presence in the Holy Land. And the Armenians and other Christians are under direct attack. So There is, last week, there was the announcement, and when I'm done talking, and so I'm not trying to multitask, I'll put the link in for you all to see, foreclosure threat against properties owned by the Armenians in the Armenian Patriarchate in Jerusalem. There was a letter that came from the heads of churches and patriarchs in Jerusalem, noting that this really is threatening the ongoing presence of Christians in the land. And so CMEP had a response. We did write in affirmation of the heads of churches, and we're really calling especially on the Trump administration and the U.S. government to do all in their power to help protect the Christian community in Jerusalem, as we really are concerned about the implications of what it would mean if there are no longer a thriving Christian community in the land. So I'll stop there. I know that we want to have time for questions and further reflection.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you. And your internet was, I mean, I know I live on Capitol Hill as well, and my internet there is sometimes, I think we could still hear you well, though, and clearly. So thank you for that. Destiny just put in the chat, for those of you listening, if you do have questions, in just a few minutes, I'll open it up. So please use the question and answer feature at the bottom of the screen, or you can put a comment in the chat, and I will seek to be attentive there. I'm eager to hear, Kyle was just speaking about the Christian character, and I heard all of you mention that as a result of your travels. One of the things that I have been astounded by is, we talk about the Arabic word samud, steadfastness, the way that Palestinians remain. And for Christians, but for all Palestinians, the pressure now to leave, be it political pressure, or be it the realities on the ground, or be it economic pressure, and this is in Gaza or the West Bank, but dozens of Christian families have left Bethlehem and Ramallah, and, parents saying, how can I raise my children when I don't know that they'll have a future, here? And I think my question for you, and I don't know who wants to take it, Bishop Chesson or Christopher, was this something that was addressed on this trip? Did you talk to pastors or leaders about this, or bishops, or, Cardinal Pizzaballa, who we've had the privilege of meeting with several times? What was the conversation like, with the Catholic bishops and others in your travels in that regard?
I'm happy to just say a few words, May, first. I'm sure Christopher will want to say something as well. Cardinal Pizzaballa was very moving in talking about the importance of the land. And I think one of the most moving sights we've seen in recent weeks is families in Gaza wanting to return to their homesteads against all the odds, even where their homes have been partially or completely destroyed. That sense of being attached to the land runs so deep, and partly explains some of the contributory factors to the conflict, where the land itself becomes contested. And this is dramatically clear. Kyle mentioned the Tent of Nations, which we visited, and the family there clinging with amazing tenacity to their land, and every possible legal device, delays, contests, new legal challenges constantly thrown at them, not allowed to access water supplies, not allowed to access electricity, not allowed to build anything above ground, so having to use the caves on the settlement, and yet still strong in faith and hope and love, and this being incredibly powerful in terms of any visit. We were deeply moved. So your question, mate, that's right at the center of our experience. And Kyle also mentioned the Armenian Quarter and the challenges there. And the heads of the churches, the patriarchs and the local heads in Jerusalem, issued a statement. I just want to read one sentence from it, which I think relates to this. It is inconceivable that Christian institutions, whose mission for centuries has been to safeguard faith, serve communities, and preserve the sacred heritage of the Holy Land, should now face the threat of property seizure under Israeli administrative measures that disregard due process. It is that disregarding of due process that is in fact being used as a weapon of oppression.
I think often of the Nasser family farm as one of the most hopeful, hopeless places I've ever been, and it inspires me. And the last time I was there, the blockade, the barricade, that used to be where we would walk the quarter of a mile or whatever the distance is to the door, that's now right outside of the gate. And just last night, we opened a bottle of wine from the Nasser family farm that I bought with my daughter here, who it was 9 years old and it still tasted good. We drank it in solidarity. So thank you for sharing that. And Christopher, we were talking, and our prayers are with His Holiness Pope Francis. I want, before we close, to pray for his health and his well-being, but the fact that he calls the Christians in Gaza, at the Holy Family Church every day. And Father Romanelli, who I've met and been with, and I've been at the church there in Gaza, but the fact that he connects with them every single day, and I've heard even from the hospital that he's connecting with them somehow as he's been sick. But I don't know if you wanted to reflect on that question as well, but I just wanted to express my gratitude.
Thank you, Doctor. And so we've mentioned Daoud Nassar and the Tent of Nations, and they live by such powerful words. They say, we refuse to be victims because victimhood corrodes the soul, and we refuse to be enemies. And in a sense, does that not fully encapsulate the Christian difference in the Holy Land? And that's why we call them the living stones of the Holy Land, because it is these people who are essentially, bringing or making permanent the presence of Christ in the lands of his birth, life-saving death, and glorious resurrection. And so the Holy Father has been very solicitous of the Christian crisis in Gaza, in the West Bank, and he has been calling Father Romanelli practically every day. Yes, and so it's just in that sense. We as Catholics believe that in the life of every Christian, there comes a point in which you are called to live out the passion, the death, and the glorious resurrection of Christ. And it seems that, from what the Christians were telling us, the Christian presence in the Holy Land is going through a very long Lent and Passion Week. And in that sense, feeling intense pressure from both sides, from the Israeli side and from the Palestinian side, the Muslim Palestinian side. In that sense, it's a very, very difficult situation. But Christians like Daoud Nassar are making presence permanently Christ in these lands.
Thank you for that. I now really want to turn and give people the opportunity to pose questions. So we have a question, and I think, Christopher, I'll have you start if you don't mind, and others, of course, can speak into it. Is there anything U.S. Catholics can do to support the Armenian Patriarch's request to Netanyahu that he freeze the legal proceedings by the municipality to pursue disputed taxes? Now, of course, we know the issue related to the Armenian Patriarchate currently is being applied to the Armenians. You know, in 2018, it was applied to other churches. It's still being applied to other churches. Right now, it's in the news, you know, because of the Armenian Patriarchate issue. But the question continues and says, is there a U.S. government representative who we could ask to raise our concerns to Netanyahu?
The answer is your congressman. So this is an issue that the Catholic presence is feeling as well. The Patriarchate of Jerusalem, the Custodia Terra Santa, the Holy Land Franciscans, as we call them here, they are feeling this intense fiscal pressure in the Holy Land, and so what I would recommend is contact your congressman and ask him or her to advocate before the Trump administration on basically urging Israel to provide relief from these municipal lawsuits. These lawsuits are being conducted at the municipal level. And so, like in 2018, when the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was closed on this very issue, and Cardinal Daniel DiNardo, the president of USCCB, co-wrote a letter to Prime Minister Netanyahu in 2018, the Prime Minister of Israel has the power to provide executive relief. So contact your congressman and ask them to advocate before the Trump administration to have Israel, the government of Israel, essentially provide relief to the churches of the Holy Land on this issue.
Thank you. Thank you. Does anyone else want to speak to that question?
I think this has expressed it very, very well. I was in the Holy Land in 2018 when the Holy Sepulchre was closed, and it had a remarkable impact, and the Prime Minister was persuaded to use his executive power to act to relieve the situation. So I think that's very good advice.
Yeah.
And actually, I would amend it very, very briefly. I would say it is very important also for Christians in the U.S. who consider themselves very pro-Israel to contact their congressman, because these lawsuits are coming at the municipal level, and so regardless of your position on these issues, very few policymakers in America want Israel to be perceived as anti-Christian, and so regardless of your position on Israel and the Palestinians, whatever it is, this matter should transcend that political dimension, because it's an administrative issue at the municipal level.
That's right. And if you're looking for those participants here or watching later online, if you're looking for language about how to do that, the statement that we put out, which I know we already put that in the chat, but can we put that link again? And Destiny, can you also include the cover letter that I wrote to Secretary of State Rubio? Because the cover letter, and we put out the Churches for Middle East Peace reaffirmed the heads of communion and the heads of communion, the patriarchs and the heads of communion of Jerusalem statement. So we wanted to affirm that. But the cover letter that I wrote references exactly what Christopher was talking about in 2018 when the Church of the Holy Sepulchre closed. And so you can use the letter that I wrote to Secretary of State Rubio, either quote it, but you can use some of the language there for some of your talking points. And I would suggest also letters to your local newspaper editor. Your members of Congress all read their local newspapers, all of them. And the smaller the newspaper, the more your local congressperson reads it. I promise you. So write letters to the editor, write op-eds. Those can be some of the most effective things that you do. And so I would encourage you, if you're not signed up for our newsletter, please do so. Kyle, I don't want to take us off point, but I think as we're talking about the Christian community, one of the things that happened this week was the 3,000 pastors in Dallas who signed the letter, and they're giving it to President Trump, acknowledging the West Bank as Judea and Samaria and belonging to Israel. Can you speak to that in light of how that endangers the Christian community and how that threatens the sustainability of the church in light of the conversation we're having right now?
Yeah, great. Cool to do that, and we can put a link in to that article in case you haven't seen that. It was, to my knowledge, done in anticipation of a pronouncement that is expected from President Trump within the next few weeks regarding the West Bank, perhaps giving explicit green light to acknowledgement from the U.S. government over sovereignty of the West Bank, of Israel over the West Bank. That could be through an executive order. We're not quite sure what function that will take, but we are monitoring that closely. And should that move forward, I think it's just another indication of the trouble that will, especially, I mean, it will impact all Palestinians, but will have an outsized influence, of course, on the Christian community and their ability to function. And I think the sad thing that is referenced here is that this is being done, at least this letter from the pastors is being done, framed explicitly in a theological way, right? To say that that President Trump should acknowledge sovereignty of what they would call Judea and Samaria by Israel over that territory because of the spiritual and theological reasons. And so CMEP has long, again, when some of this came up during the first Trump administration, and there were talks about the U.S. officially recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the West Bank, standing firmly against that. We had our Churches Against Annexation campaign. It's something that we're looking to relaunch. So please do sign up for, if you haven't already, we'll make sure it's in the chat. Please make sure that you're on CMEP's list, because we would also like to counter that, to show that there is a Christian narrative here in the US that does not follow that same viewpoint, right? That we believe in the importance of security, safety, and prosperity for all in the Holy Land, Israelis and Palestinians, and that acknowledging sovereignty over Israeli sovereignty over the West Bank would make any possibility of a Palestinian state in any form impossible. And so it's a grave threat, and I think it's something that we want to, again, make sure that there is a Christian response to, that there are those of you who are watching are able to use your voices, as May said, letters to the editor on any topic are always welcome. But this is something that we're really troubled by, and we'll be monitoring and be on the lookout. We'll have action alerts. We'll have ways that you can plug in from your point. If you're watching from the US, if you're watching from the UK or other locations, then please reach out to others that are local, but we're happy to help connect you if you need that as well.
Well, and one of the initiatives Kyle is leading coming up on March 19th and 20th is our National Advocacy Summit in Washington, D.C. So we'd welcome you to join us then. Bishop Chesson, if you want to come across the Atlantic, we'd love to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
Yes. So, Christopher and Bishop Chesson, I'm eager to hear what moved you the most, as you were traveling, what provoked your spirit, what stayed with you, what's keeping you up at night. It's been more than 500 days since October 7th. And one of the things I say all the time is this certainly did not begin on October 7th, but October 7th was a day that changed history. And so, what moved you? What provoked your spirit during your travels?
Well, we said at the beginning of our communique that we came as pilgrims. And so we ourselves were on a journey. We were travelers. We were traveling alongside our Christian brothers and sisters in the Holy Land. And that reminded me of the founding principles, really, of the Holy Land coordination, which include acknowledging presence, the importance of presence, the importance of prayer, and the importance of putting pressure on the political structures based on our concern for justice with peace and also for reconciliation. So I think all the conversations were never at any point showing us despair, as Christopher was saying about visiting the Tent of Nations. That refusal to be victims, refusal to be enemies, was springing out of a very strong living faith. And that was wonderful to see.
Thank you.
I would say I would briefly mention two things. One is, yes, as the bishop said, we went there as pilgrims of hope. So we didn't go as experts. We did not go to provide solutions, but to listen and to learn from the Christians of the Holy Land. And I was humbled beyond my ability to express it with the faith of our brothers and sisters in Christ in the Holy Land. Not just Catholics, but Orthodox, Anglican, Lutheran. It was a real catechesis for me to actually witness that faith burning bright. The second thing that was a really stark realization, and certainly much more on the policy side, is that in this post-October 7th world that the Middle East finds itself in, and all the developments springing from that, we are seeing the extremely challenging scenario in which the two-state solution, which is supported by the Holy See, by USCCB, and was United States policy probably until very recently, if not, if it isn't still, even though at the mere written word, but we are seeing the gradual death of the two-state solution. And that brings with it challenges that I don't know if we've been able to, if we've even begun to try to comprehend. So in that sense, there's a lot of work to continue to do, and a lot of we need to continue expressing our solidarity with the Christians and with all men and women of goodwill in Israel and the Palestinian territories.
Thank you. Kyle, same question to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think what stuck with me is what I've mentioned before about the impact of the Christian community and the real fear, I think, which was more relevant or more acute than I have experienced in prior times throughout the ongoing sustainability of that community. It was repeated, but there was also that real sense of persistence and resilience. We heard from folks who, Palestinian Christians, who are committed and resolute in staying on the land. Some of them even have citizenship in other countries and have lived in other places, but have decided to stay put and are doing what they can to make their community better. I did a couple of meetings on my own, and so there were times where I was venturing through the old city, and it struck me how empty it was. Again, this was my first time being back since October 7th. I know that it was a low season, right, for tourism anyway, because it was after Christmas, but I would encourage those who are watching, if you're considering to travel, the importance of being there, because I was really struck. I've never been in Jerusalem where I'm the only person walking through the old city, and could see kind of the desperation of the shop owners, each one trying to get me to spend a few minutes with them because there were simply no people walking by. And so that really struck me, and I would really encourage you, if your church is thinking about making a trip, to reach out to us, because we have the resources to help make that possible. But we really would encourage you all to consider starting to plan, because it's really just critically important for the community, for us to be there, to stand alongside our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land.
Yes, I heard Cardinal Pizzaballa issue an invitation and say to churches, come now, right? Like we're we're welcome. Come and on pilgrimages, come on solidarity trips. And so one of the things churches can do is travel. And, we at Churches for Middle East Peace would be happy to host churches, not just doing Disneyland tours, but traveling to actually really go in solidarity with the Christian community, but with all who are suffering there. Many of you have heard Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac saying, where were you? Where were you when Palestinians were experiencing what many are calling a genocide, and what Churches for Middle East Peace is saying at a minimum is ethnic cleansing? Our time has very quickly come to an end, and Fa'ed Abu Akal has asked, what action items do you call our local churches to? We actually are doing speaking tours, and we're going to be in Atlanta, where Fa'ed is, and we still have some opportunities. If you're in Atlanta, North Carolina, and Florida, if your church would like to host, reach out to us, because we have some spots on the schedule. So that's one opportunity. Fa'ed is on my list to give you a call. But I know also someone had mentioned Lent. For Lent, we're inviting people to do Gaza ceasefire pilgrimages again. So last Lent, all 7 continents and more than 20 countries around the world, thousands and thousands of people walked the distance of the length of Gaza, 26 miles. It doesn't have to all be at the same time. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. And I know Atlanta did it, even after Lent. And so doing pilgrimages walks, you can do it also to your elected officials. That is something that you can continue to do. Our advocacy is something we mentioned. But Bishop Chesson, calls to action, and then Kyle, I'll go to you as well.
Well, I think simply I want to echo what you're saying, May. Pilgrimage is incredibly significant. It's a living form of prayer. If you can't go to the Holy Land as a pilgrim, pray and put pressure on your political representatives to do something about addressing the injustices. But if you can go on pilgrimage, the part of the states of Palestine and Israel that have been most severely affected by the economic impact of the war have been the Christian community because of the absence of pilgrims. That is a real way in which you can make a difference to the livelihoods of people, brothers and sisters in Christ, in the Holy Land.
Yep, I completely agree with the bishop. Like I said, if you're in the US, CMEP will have resources in the next few weeks, different action alerts that you're able to take. I would encourage your church community to consider maybe whether you do it in person or via Zoom, to gather a larger group of people that will commit to taking action. You can also think about scheduling. We'd love for you to come to DC and participate in our advocacy summit. But for those that can't travel, your church can organize a few folks to commit to pursuing, even if it's virtual, a meeting with your congressional offices to discuss these issues. And that's something that I would be happy to help facilitate. I'll put my email in the chat. And if there are folks that aren't comfortable meeting, picking a date where you might all come together and write together to your congressional office, so that there's a sense of community that you're doing it together, or be on a Zoom where you can all call at the same time and mute yourself, but again, feel that you're in community. So if you're interested in the advocacy follow-up, my email is there, and we'd be happy to help in any way that we can.
We have so many ways that you can get involved if you want to volunteer. I mean, our biggest limitation is our capacity in terms of mobilizing, fundraising. We need help fundraising. I'm running an Ironman, and my goal is to raise $140,000 by September, for $1,000 for every mile that I have to move. And I haven't even really started raising the $140,000. So I need people to be on that team, let alone the fact that I actually have to do the 140 miles. So you can all please pray for me in that regard. But there's so many things you can do. We're also hosting Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac on April 1st and 2nd in Washington, D.C. He has a new book coming out called Christ Under the Rubble, and we're privileged to walk alongside him in that. So I do want to close in prayer, and let's keep in prayer His Holiness Pope Francis as well, and the verses that come to mind as we close. And I want to also say my appreciation. Thank you so much, Bishop Chesson. I know Christopher had to leave. He let us know he was going to step out early. Thank you so much, Kyle. I'm grateful for your leadership. Thank you to each and every one of you who is on the call. Thank you for all that you are doing. Do not give up. Keep going. Be persistent. Your efforts, it may not seem like they're making a difference, but they are. I know these are terribly challenging times. 2 Corinthians 4 says, and I've heard this preached in Palestine, we are hard pressed on every side, not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. For we who are alive are always being given over to the death for Christ's sake, so that his life may be revealed in our mortal body. So then death is at work in us, but life is at work in you. And a few verses later it says, therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we're wasting away, yet inwardly we're being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes on not what is seen, but what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. I share those words as a prayer we keep in thought and mind His Holiness Pope Francis. Each of you who shared your reflections on this trip, each of you who joined us here today. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you for being with us. Godspeed and many blessings to you.
Thank you so much.